Welcome everyone. In this episode, we are going to talk about physiology of football or soccer for some of our listeners. And we have a great guest for today's episode. Our guest is working as a professor and dean of Faculty of Health Sciences in the University of Faroe Islands. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome our guest, Professor Magni Mohr. Welcome, Magni.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, great to have you. So you are from Faroe Islands. I think probably many of our listeners don't know too much about the islands. Could you tell us a bit about the islands, climate, and how is life there?
Yeah, the Faroe Islands is a small country in Northern Europe. So it's based between Norway and Iceland, and it's a small island country, only 55,000 people. It's a quite developed country. Lifestyle is quite similar to Iceland and Norway and the Scandinavian region. So it's a very good place to be. Yeah. The weather could be better, but otherwise it's great.
Yeah. So you have few small islands there, a group of islands and kind of middle of the sea.
18 islands. Yeah, 18.
Yeah. No, that's really interesting. So you've been doing quite a bit of research about football. How did you end up doing research in football?
Yeah, I was a football player myself. I played on the Faroes from I was 5 years old, and then I moved to Denmark, kept on playing there, and went to the university. And during my university time, I quite early got involved in like as an assistant in research projects that involved football, match analysis in football, and so on. And that led to some great opportunities working with as fitness coach and match analyst for various teams in Denmark, Danish national team. At one point, I was doing match analysis for Juventus in Italy. And then after my university time, I did the PhD in the physiology of soccer or football. And then I've been basically researching but having some time off when I've been working for teams as fitness coach. So between the laboratory and the university and the pitch now for 25 years. And so most of my research actually involves football, both the competitive side of football, but also football as means of health promotion.
So 25 years of analyzing and researching football. What do you find as the most fascinating parts?
I think that it's quite interesting over these 25 years to see that when we began try to understand what football is. So we were among the first groups in the world that started to do systematic match analysis and to look at football from the match analyzing perspective, because when you watch the game, you always focus on where the ball is. So if the ball is on the right side, you look on the right side, and therefore you perceive the game to be at a very high intensity during the entire game. But when you look at the individual player and how they respond to a game, even at the highest level, Champions League or the World Cup, you see that most of the time players are actually walking and then they are jogging. And those very few but very important intense actions that they have, they are very short. So it's short bursts of really high intensity exercise followed by recovery periods. And that's like the fundamental understanding that you need to have of any sport. And when you have these match analyzing data, you may have another view on what the game is. So I think that's the starting point is to understand what football is, and then try to link that to physiology. So try to obtain physiological measurements throughout the game. So that's I think still when we are working, we're still struggling with trying to understand some of those same basic questions.
So basically you said that it's a little bit less intensive when you look at the individual players. Could you give us some details to give an idea what is the demands of football game?
Yeah. The football is very complex in relation to demands, and we call it a hybrid sport because you need to have a high endurance capacity because you are repeating these intense actions throughout 90 minutes, sometimes 120 minutes. And then you need to be very good at doing high intensity exercise and to recover from that. You also need to be good at speeding, at sprinting, but you also have strength and balance and coordination. So if we look at those qualities from the outside, then if we look at the individual players in the team, there are huge individual variations. So even if we and most teams still are training football players as a team, we see very, very large variations, and some variations that are so large that it could be different sports. So if we look at the amount of high intensity exercise, which is the important part of football, it may be 8 times higher for one player compared to another.
Yeah, so a lot of individual differences, and you said that you need to have a capability for high intensity. How would you quantify kind of the capability that you need to be able to perform in the end of the game, which needs some sort of endurance recoverability, but you need high intensity activity that you can actually go and make the goal and sprint fast? So how would you say the balance between these two different things?
Yeah, and when you mention these things, the balance, it also leads to another question, and that is how is the physiological demands and the tactical approach of a team and even of an individual player, the tactical role of a player. These things are also interconnected. Some players in the team are limited to work to utilize their entire capacity in a game because of their tactical roles, such as central defenders and the holding midfielder in some systems, not all. While most of the other players are utilizing their entire physical capacity in the game, and we see that that if we look at matches, maybe 90% of all matches, the most intense period of the game is the first 15 minutes. And after that, like the game comes into a stage where more or less there is the same intensity until the end of the game, where there's a decline and most of the players start to fatigue. So the balance between this is highly related to the role in the team. It's all highly related to the way you play. So if you are Barcelona or Manchester City and you have that style of play, you need to have a physiological preparation that is quite different. For example, if you are a more transition-based team or counter-attack team, so it's highly related to both at team level, but also at individual level to the team tactics. So it's an integrated sport where things there is an interplay between team tactics and the physiological side of it.
Yeah, so basically the strength and conditioning coaches should know better, or should know well the tactic, and should know what kind of fitness is needed for this kind of tactic.
Yeah, and basically both at team level and at individual level, you are not conditioning players or teams for football, but you are conditioning players and team for a specific type of football. So this is why it's so important that there is a common understanding in a team, like the head coach, the assistant coaches, the fitness coaches, the goalkeeping coach. All of these persons needs to be able to communicate and to plan according to what they want to achieve from a holistic perspective. So this is why you are not conditioning Liverpool necessarily the same as you are conditioning Barcelona.
So how do you see how many teams, how many percentage of teams are doing this well, that they have the tactics and the training done in synchronization in a way?
I think it has improved a lot because I've been working in the English Premier League and La Liga and in those teams some years ago, we were maybe scratching the surface on that level. But I think that today, because of technology and because of that most teams have educated staff, they have people that have come out of university and that are educated in the physiology of football and also that have this basic understanding of what football is and that you need to condition players for their specific role in the team, and all this information about the individual variations and the interplay between physiology and tactics and technical abilities and so on. So I think that we're getting better at that, but we are far away from being good enough on that basis.
Yeah, and you said that the first 15 minutes is most intensive, then it stays the same, and then there's the fatigue in the end. Have you looked how many matches are decided in the period when the players are fatigued? Is it more goals there? Does it affect the game?
Yeah, we know that there are more decisions or decisive events in the last 50 minutes. So that's a critical period of the game. We also see some tendency for these types of decisive events being more distributed in the beginning of the game. So I'd say that the early phase of the game, where players are fully recovered, but also during the entire game, we have these situations that we call peak periods, and those are the most intense period for the individual player. And when we look at what happens football-wise, so technically, tactically in those moments, it's where decisions or decisive events occur. So I would say that there are the early phase of the game, and then I would say the peak periods that happens during the game, and then the last 50 minutes. These are the critical events in a football game. And going back to what I said earlier, that if you look at match analysis for 80% of a game, 80% of the time, even in the English Premier League and even at the national team of Germany and Spain and Brazil and so on, players are walking, standing still, or jogging for 80% of the time. So most of the entire of the full game is being spent on low intense activities. And this is why what is interesting from a physical point of view, but also from a football perspective, are those really intense sequences that occur in the game. And these are increasing dramatically if we go back in time and look at the match analysis data from the 1990s. We see that the intense part of the game was much less than it is today. So it has developed into similar to ice hockey, that you have sequences where the intensity is extreme, followed by recovery period, and then you repeat those sequences again and again until the end of the game. So that's a huge difference, and that is what football coaches and fitness coaches should have the emphasis on, those intense and critical moments of the game.
So would you even say that football is, from physiological point of view, like a power game, that you need a lot of explosive power, but just enough endurance to be able to survive the game.
Yeah, it is a combination, and the balance between power and endurance is also related to the style of playing, like we said before. But it's developing more and more towards being a power sport. It's much more a power sport today than it was a few decades ago. Quite recently, during the first lockdown of COVID, we wrote an editorial to a scientific journal. So it was football researchers from Europe, and then we also had some representation from a football team in the Premier League to have the football angle on it. And the idea was to try to predict how football will look in 2030. So if we go around 10 years in time, how will football look? And we did that by going back in time and analyzing how much has it changed, and if it stays on this trajectory of change that it is on now, how will it look? And it will explode in relation to how intense football will be in the future. More games, more training, much more higher intensity, more sprinting, more explosive events. That is what football will develop into, and I think we already see those trends. And now we have the 5 substitutions during the game, which is a direct consequence of that. People are starting to acknowledge how hard and demanding it has become.
So basically, developing power needs certain type of training. It needs like fast movement with certain loads, maybe Olympic lifts, maybe plyometrics. Do you see enough power-oriented training in football if the game demands power?
I think it's I think that like what we call high intensity interval training, or and then strength training. So strength training in the gym, and then high intensity training on the pitch. These are the components that should be prioritized in relation to these changes in demands, but also in relation to what football actually is. So I would say that I don't know what's going on in all teams in the world, but when I'm in the football community, I also see now that we are moving towards markedly higher emphasis on strength training, but also on more intense training on the team, on the field. I would say that we are not there. We should do more of it, and in a more structured way. But I think we see very clearly that these things have changed.
And how would you say, you have analyzed the sport and you probably know very well the seconds of something, like how many seconds intensive activity is. So would you say that it's more about maximum performance, like how fast you sprint, or that can you do the high intensity work without getting fatigued, for example, after 7 seconds of something?
Yeah, I would say it's a balance between those, because if you may have a central defender that is doing 7 sprints in the game, 7 sprints that are 1, 2, 3 seconds long, and as such, this is not demanding, but every single action of these actions may be decisive. So for that type of player, it's much more important to be explosive and to be able to read the game and react than it is to be endurance, to have a high endurance capacity. And then you may have like a box-to-box midfield player who needs to be good at many things, but every time that player is doing high intensity work, this player is under stress, because this player needs to work all the time. He needs to he or she needs to be at the right time, at the right place. They have many long runs. So for that player, it's less important to be like explosive in single actions compared to what it is to be able to maintain as little fatigue as possible when these actions occur. And this is back to that many years ago we started to have an individual focus. When I was doing these match analysis for Juventus, we started to do individual training, trying to train the player according to the game demands. And later, I worked for Chelsea Football Club. We developed that model quite extensively together with Carlo Ancelotti, who's now the coach of Real Madrid. And during those years, we had quite detailed analysis of like key performance indicators for the individual player. So what actually is occurring in the game and how can we train that on the pitch and according to physiological principles. So I think this is a little where the development of football lies, to be able to train the player as close to his or her game demands as possible.
So could you tell some of the changes that you do? You have the key performance indicators. How did you change the training?
Yeah, you can change the training because if you have a full squad of football, like in the big teams, you have 25 or 30 players. And one of the things that is special in team sports in general is that you play games all the time. So you play at least once a week, but during the season, but at least in some parts of the game, you play 2 or 3 games a week. So it may be perceived as a coach that I always need to prepare for the next game. So it's almost about playing and recovering. For those players that are playing the game, it's only 8 players that may play the entire game. And with 5 substitutions now, it may only be 5 players that are playing the entire game. So you have a lot of opportunities to do individual training with those players that are not playing. You will also have a lot of opportunities to do individual training, individual physical training with those players that are playing small sequences of the game. So the substitute players. So we did a lot of that by trying to focus on those players that were not playing and to find like holes in the program where players could work on an individual basis.
And how do you said that there's basically games all the time. How do you see the role of strength training? It's quite difficult if you do hard leg strength training to be able to perform, to be still dexter with your feet. How do you see programming hard strength training in the program?
Yeah, it depends on how well prepared your players are. So if you're starting from scratch, it's always good to start outside the season. So when the players go on holiday, they can be prepared for strength training. Depends on your scenario. But if you have a team that is well prepared, they are technically developed, they know the drills, they can do them without problems, then actually I think the best place to do strength training during the season, when if you play on a Sunday, then do the strength training on the Monday, the day after the game. And even if the players are tired at that time, there is an opportunity to do strength training, but low volume, but high resistant strength training. And then you may have another strength training session, for example, on the Wednesday, where you have a more focused and extensive session. And if you play twice a week, if you play on Sunday and Wednesday, you can have 2 sessions. But both of them will be short, and they will be the day after the game. Because the day after the game it's a period where the players are fatigued, they are tired from the game, but they can still do maintenance of strength. So a strength training session where they don't go to failure, but they do maybe 6 repetitions of a weight that they can lift 8 times. Only 3 sets, and only for these types of such as squat, deadlifts, those types of drills. This is something that many teams are doing now, because it's not possible really to do it the second day of recovery, because then you need to start training again, or that is also a dangerous time to do too high volume training. And then if you do it on the too close to the next game, you will also have problems. So I think this is a good solution, and many teams use it as part of their recovery strategy to do strength training. And there may also be some physiological benefits there that can promote the recovery process by doing strength training the day after the game.
So basically, you would say that the main point is maintenance of the strength, and not going to failure, but kind of staying in the range of doing 6 out of 8 you could do.
Yeah, because if you have a relatively high priority on strength training during the preseason, and if you stop doing strength training, like if you stop doing strength training in the gym when the season starts, you will lose that. You will lose that strength quite fast. So in order to obtain a high stimulus, both on the muscular level but also on the nervous system, it's important that you maintain it. And studies show that you can maintain strength and explosiveness by doing low volume training if the resistance is high.
And how do you see the off season? Is it long enough to actually see considerable improvements, or is it mainly kind of maintenance also?
Yeah, the off season is very dependent on where you are in the world. If you are in Northern Europe, in the Faroe Islands where I am, or Finland where you are coming from, maybe the off season is quite long, and there are huge opportunities to do various stuff. But if you are in the big leagues in Europe, the off season is really short, and many of the players that are playing in the big leagues are also national team players, meaning that at least every second year they are occupied with Euros and World Cups. So for those scenarios, it is quite different what you can use to, because you also need to players also need to go on holiday and do nothing. So it's dependent on where you are.
Yeah, and basically you said that there's games all the time. Do you think you need a little bit more of aerobic capacity to recover from the games than what is demanded within the game?
Yeah, you need, like I said in the beginning, it's complex compared to if you are a 100-meter runner, or if you are a marathon runner, you are at the end of the spectrum between really high intensity work and really extreme endurance work. So football is a little of everything. So obviously you need to have a solid aerobic base in order to not only to recover fast, but also to really to improve, to perform. And we have done some studies where we have tried to look for physiological predictors of performance in the game. And we see that some of the aerobic qualities of the muscles, so the ability of the muscles to utilize fat as a substrate, is really, really important for the ability to maintain a high intensity throughout the game. So also to be able to work hard at the end of the game. And we see that all of the explosive actions and the ability to resist fatigue during the most intense sequences of the game is related to other physiological variables, such as the ability to maintain the ion balance in the muscles and so on. So different types of performance, endurance, high intensity exercise, and so on are linked to certain physiological systems. And when you plan your training, you need to think about stimulating those physiological system, instead of saying that if I'm going to improve endurance, I need to do long sessions of low intensity work, like people did in decades ago, and maybe still are doing that some parts of the world. You need to think in physiological systems, and we know that if you train at a high intensity, you also train some of the aerobic abilities. So if you are already well trained, then maybe high intensity training is the best endurance training as well.